Welcome to today's Explainer. We're unpacking a truly wild piece of global history today. It's the story of how a tiny kingdom in Western Europe managed to completely disrupt global trade, absolutely dominate one of the richest maritime networks in the world, and honestly set the stage for centuries of colonialism in India.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's the central mystery we're solving today. How did Portugal, a really small country with super limited manpower and resources, manage to challenge and dominate the massive, established commercial systems of the Arabs, Gujaratis, Egyptians, and these incredibly powerful Indian rulers? The sheer improbability of it is just staggering.
To uncover how they actually pulled this off, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the quest for spices, then move to Almeida's blue water policy, Albuquerque's territorial conquest, the Cartaz trade system, the broader cultural and economic impacts, and wrap up with their fall and legacy.
All right, Section 1, the quest for spices. So to understand why the Portuguese went to such extreme lengths, we have to rewind a bit to 1453. When the Ottoman Turks captured Constantinople, they basically took control of the major trade routes connecting Europe and Asia. Suddenly, Eastern goods became impossibly expensive for Europeans because they had to pass through multiple Arab middlemen. This created this intense desperation for a direct sea route, and that leads us to 1498, when Portuguese sailor Vasco da Gama sailed around the Cape of Good Hope and landed at Calicut. Guys, this was an absolute economic revolution.
Now you might be wondering, why the obsession? It's really easy to think of spices as just a luxury to flavor food, right? But back then, they were an absolute necessity. Spices literally preserved meat during long, harsh European winters. They were essential medicines. Add in the famous Indian cotton textiles, known as calicoes, plus high-value silk and precious stones, and finding a direct route to India wasn't just about making a profit, it was a matter of unimaginable wealth and national survival.
Let's move into Section 2, Almeida's blue water policy.
The Portuguese quickly realized that just showing up and trading wasn't going to be enough to break that existing Arab dominance. So, in 1505, just 7 years after Vasco da Gama's arrival, they sent Francisco de Almeida to be their first governor in India. They were no longer just sending independent explorers. They were establishing a highly organized, heavily militarized administration.
And Almeida brought with him a very specific vision, the blue water policy. This meant Portugal's power should depend strictly on naval supremacy, rather than trying to conquer land. It's a key historical takeaway here. Almeida's core belief was simple but brilliant. Whoever controls the sea routes controls the trade itself.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how effective that was. In 1509, at the Battle of Diu, a massive combined fleet of Egyptians, Arabs, and Gujaratis tried to challenge the Portuguese. But there was a catch. The Portuguese had heavily armed ships equipped with cannons, and they won decisively. For the very first time, a European naval power defeated major Asian maritime forces, cementing European dominance in the Indian Ocean.
Okay, on to Section 3, Albuquerque's territorial conquest. Now, what's really interesting about this is how strategies evolve. Enter Alfonso de Albuquerque. He was Almeida's successor and the man widely considered the real founder of Portuguese power in India. While Almeida just wanted to rule the water, Albuquerque looked at the situation and believed sea power alone simply wasn't enough. He wanted permanent territorial control. He wanted an actual physical empire on land.
This philosophical shift became a stark reality in 1510 with the capture of Goa from the Sultan of Bijapur. 1510 is a massive turning point. It's the exact moment the Portuguese stopped being temporary foreign traders and officially transformed into an occupying territorial ruling force. Goa effectively became the permanent headquarters of their entire administration.
But Albuquerque didn't stop there. He captured Malacca in 1511 and Hormuz in the Persian Gulf, securing the absolute most strategic choke points in the ocean. But he was also kind of a social engineer. He encouraged Portuguese men to marry Indian women to create a loyal, permanent Luso-Indian population. And he aggressively promoted Christianity, building churches to really cement Portuguese cultural and religious rule.
Section 4, the Cartaz trade system.
So the crucial point is this. Now that they had the territory and the ships, how did they systematically make their money? Well, the Cartaz system. This was essentially a state-sponsored protection racket. If you were a ship, literally any ship, sailing in the Arabian Sea, you had to buy this mandatory naval permit from the Portuguese. If you didn't have a Cartaz, Portuguese warships would attack, loot, or completely destroy your vessel. It granted them a total unyielding monopoly.
To enforce this monopoly, they built an ironclad infrastructure. They established this whole network of coastal forts and factories across centers like Cochin, Daman, Diu, and Bassein, with Goa as the absolute epicenter. These hubs functioned as military bases to enforce the Cartaz, administrative centers, trade hubs, and bases for missionary activity. It was just a perfectly integrated system of control.
Moving to Section 5, Cultural and Economic Impacts.
Okay, this is absolutely one of the most surprising takeaways from this era, especially if you love modern Indian food. Think about tobacco, cashew, pineapple, papaya, and the potato. These feel like completely native, foundational ingredients in modern Indian agriculture and cuisine, right? But no way. None of them are originally native to India. They were actually all brought over on Portuguese ships.
And here's another massive milestone, 1556. This is the exact year the Portuguese introduced the very first printing press to India, specifically down in Goa. Now, while their main goal was likely printing religious texts to aid their missionary work, introducing printing technology was a monumental, game-changing leap forward in Indian intellectual and literary history.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 6, the fall and legacy.
Let's see how this all builds because, well, no empire lasts forever. The early tolerance that Indian rulers had for the Portuguese, mostly due to the mutual benefits of trade, eventually turned into outright hostility. Portuguese arrogance, piracy, and forced conversions created deep local resentment. This peaked in 1632 when the Mughal Empire attacked their settlement at Hooghly. Then, back in Europe in 1580, Portugal united with Spain, which basically dragged Portuguese colonies into Spanish wars. Ultimately, they were simply outmatched by the arrival of much better resourced Dutch and English trading companies.
But even though their empire declined, their legacy was absolutely permanent. They were the first Europeans to establish political control in India. They proved that heavily armed ships could secure naval supremacy, and they successfully militarized global trade. But most crucially, they proved a highly dangerous reality. A foreign trading power could successfully transform into a ruling political power.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative question. The Portuguese kicked open the doors for European colonialism in India and proved it could be done. But who was waiting in the wings? As the Portuguese faded, India would soon face a power much larger and much more dangerous. The English East India Company, a company that came for trade and stayed to rule. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I really hope it helped you visualize the incredible scale of this historical turning point.